Jesse, here. Jesse.
Well, see, it's probably. Second. All in favor,
Aye. Good evening, council. Thanks for having me back. I have a brief presentation regarding the opportunity that the village has to leverage tip, positive tip reimbursement with NCA structure through development. The key the key and this presentation have the options of watching. The core policy questions that are discussed. What's the best practices for long-term village revenue while still delivering public infrastructure? My proposal is straightforward. Legalize development agreements when it makes sense to provide for possible reimbursement development infrastructure in exchange for including that development villages. For context, currently the village has three tip districts. Based upon one the village NTA established with currently village owned property. It's allowed to levy development charges to support community facilities, which are broader bucket. The tips are useful too, but they're more of a blunt force into the deal with infrastructure, public infrastructure. Very flat and Bates farm tips are one of change consumption both on the 30 years. The village, pardon the schools with make and there are provisions for with their certain public infrastructure projects that will help develop those sites. But it has a maximum lifespan of 30 years. So if certain infrastructure focus and time based on those tips, you can model out the expected net present value of those future dollars. So in the future, $30 worth more today than so these 30-year totals for different rates are what you could expect to potentially borrow from them today with the future revenue stream created. So net 30 years go by in 2030, 2065, the net present value of that development 13 and that ends at 30. So once 30 years run its course, normal taxation so that
Growth rate for 6%, revenue, assuming that's your discount rate, what is that tied to?
It's tied to the average cost of that issue. And any type of treasury or, yeah.
So that's your risk-free rate.
Yeah. So the village's MCA, as compared to the TIP program, the TIPs are site-specific, right? The village's MCA may exist, there are no set expiration for a new community program. The MCA authorized the petition and the declaration from the development charge for residential village take 80% of that and share 20% for non-residential, the 90%. NCAs also are an important tool for risk allocation. The NCA itself has the ability to issue bond, issue debt for infrastructure financing or community facility financing. So that means that the NCA's credit is on the hook and it's siloed from the village. So the NCA a clearinghouse essentially for project specific costs and debt that otherwise would potentially be borne by the village for issues of road improvements. So the NCA is long-term structurally durable or it can be more finely tuned within that pendulum parameter to the specific need of development. So the NCA, whereas their TIP is funding straight from public infrastructure, NCA has a public infrastructure plus there's a bigger bucket of potential things that an NCA fund. So street lighting, grants, municipal facilities, educational facilities. And they can allocate the costs of doing that machines or those costs. So the practical differences in NCA authority extend beyond just the construction. So if you think of a 30-year like time to construct the road, construct the sewer system, then after 30 years, those maintenance costs and those costs for repair and paying individuals to service those items, that revenue stream goes away. Even if the useful life of that asset is still producing. So when you layer the TIP with NCA, projected total revenue stream of those particular two base farm is 13 plus 9 over 30 years. And after 30 years, you continue to see a revenue stream potentially that can be assigned to those costs that were animated by the TIP. So the village doesn't trade away any value by potentially giving reimbursement to a private developer. It's essentially giving $1 to get $2. And the way that you can leverage that is through development. So this is a visualization of how the systems, it's possible to allow for additional funds that the NCA would provide. Um, so the and council's responsibility for the maintenance of the future of the village is the necessity to pay for the upkeep of public infrastructure. So the village is constantly weighing short-term, long-term, short-term need versus long-term physical durability of village. And so you don't want to put all of your money up front and then not have a revenue stream that collect on those upfront costs and those maintenance costs. So this policy alignment of short-term and long-term, the addition of the property to the NCA provides long-term village revenue, increased bonding capacity, and additional funding flexibility. So council can consider whether to adjust or allow for particular developer reimbursement in cases that the village believes are of good benefit of the developer. Will be able to pay quality public infrastructure products, and through a development agreement can get the consent of the property owner to add their property. So whereas the village enjoys the power to place a tip over any land within the village, the NCA requires consent of the property so that these potential charges are noted on in the front door. And that's where this concept of new growth subsidizing new growth is additionally allocated units. It's moving risk away from people who reside in the village permanently using all of the services from subsidizing community development on the backs of all of that infrastructure that they pay. It requires new to pay. So growth should pay for growth. Basically, is the framing that I want you guys to keep in mind. Without this structure, the costs, the relative costs over time, begin to be socialized. Villagers who have involved actually their home for decades. So development agreements can leverage these distinctions of the NCA combined on the front. And ensures that long-term costs are absorbed by that new project and not socialized to and that's the condition. If you have any questions.
All right, so I'm probably the reason why we're having this discussion anyway. Thank you, Adam. This is helpful. So a few things for me. Sorry, I think so I think what I'm understanding here from this is that you're securing some long-term revenue streams, you have to give a carrot today, right? And you're discounting your net present value at 60%. So my question, well, I have a couple questions. I'll start with what has to be true, or what assumptions are under there? Put it on like what has to be true for an NCA to provide more revenue in the long term and higher net present value than just going through paying the tax person.
So the project has to be built out. So these models, assume that what they say is what's going to happen. They're going to build a company. The market dictate that they cut it off instead. So in the net present value, is market force.
Right, right.
So it's a wider kind of regional statewide. Assuming power, the larger economy.
So that part's fluctuates, right? I mean, right now, it's the way you're talking, it's the average 10 year is 4%. That could change. So that, nobody really controls that, right? With that, so there, but is there another assumption from there, for example, that say that to your example, for 190 bucks, and the estimated value is 300,000. Let's make that improves at 4% or increases 4%, which means generally it's like housing increase, right? So with that, you're kind of, is it true that you would be assuming that kind of that historical average of home values is going to continue? But if we went into, for example, another 10% year over year for a sustained period, that change the calculus.
Yeah, all of the net benefits kind of goes to the village. If the value of the asset increases, that value is to the village, not to privately developer. So the structure would be a limited cap, specific reimbursement for very particular laid out top that the developer would have to do on the front. And but that risk of costs being overrun with projects that are developer they're not formed by the village. First of all, they're not formed by the village as on the credit for you're limiting that liability. Anything but that particular project actually producing that. And so if their project fails, then they are out the money for this infrastructure that they have to. That's the reason why they get so if I guess if all goes to hell, it's on the developer. And it all goes great, then the village gets that additional benefit. These models, so the net present value is intentionally set high, so that we are giving a realistic, low, like that, so we're not trying to
Yeah, you're right.
change the rosy picture.
It'll change every day, right? So,
Yeah.
So, I apologize. All right, so, and forgive me, I'm trying to understand this the best I can, right? So, help me walk through two different scenarios where we have, let's say there's no TIF, no NCA, it's at a house, it's $300,000. It gets assessed at 35% of that value, 300 some thousand. Then that, however many bills and both of that goes to school district, county, so on and so forth, Asheville, I believe, 5 million.
I still get all of the bills, it's up 20% of the bills.
Okay. So how does it,
In the normal taxation,
right,
Asheville would get, somewhere around. With the NCA, which, that's the.
so with the NCA, that tax dollar, that would typically get spread out in the school district, Asheville, now. Wait, so I think I can say.
If it's a 10 month deal, we get 8 hours, which is
Okay, And under normal circumstances, about 10 pounds, yeah.
Yeah, so the difference there is also is the tip is net zero to the tax liability. So the tip is generating infrastructure by isolating other real property. The NTA is in addition to, so if in the case you're saying with no tip from NTA, a property owner pays 100 units for taxation. And those 100 units are spread to the various tax jurisdictions. With a tip, for residential development, the village would be receiving somewhere in the ballpark of 30 to 40%. Because the school village is going to school, and that's probably 60 to 70% of total taxation. So 60 to 70 units going to school. Residential tips also require incremental to county agent certain fire and township levies with properties not if it's added to the property. And so, whereas currently the village is getting 5 to 10%, but then the village would get 35 to 40% tax liability. The NTA is that property is paying 110, and 10 of those extra of those 10 extra units, 8 would be for the NTA of those NTA.
So as a developer from Nashville, why do I want to be involved?
Well, the cost of the infrastructure, a lot of times are factored into the code one that the bank is required for the program to fit. So more cost, equal more cost than need to be offered to the department. So that's either rents will go up or prices of homes will go up with those fees associated, particularly directly by agreeing to essentially buy in the village agrees to buy in which the official development. That cost is already taken care of through the PIF reimbursement. So that extra cost doesn't have to be accounted for on the projected rents or projected values that the bank requires to make a loan. So having those costs be able to come in over time also means that you can take that debt and essentially consolidate it or borrow against it. So with the TIF reimbursement, such a developer has the ability to say to a lender, I haven't produced for this revenue stream that has this so that they can get money up front to build the actual thing, but they don't want to fund those costs from increased rent. Additionally, they can make the asset better. They can provide additional things, but they have that additional money up front. So the village can work with the developer for particularized setbacks, particularized additional items that wouldn't necessarily be able to say uh, change the zoning requirement. You can incentivize them to build a better product that works better for people by allowing those costs.
In that scenario, when you're talking about, taking on debt, you're talking about the village taking on debt to upgrade infrastructure, you're talking about the developer taking on additional debt to essentially, they have to finance.
Either or, and TIF bonding is a pretty mature market in Ohio. Port authorities utilize the average, the specific revenue of TIFs. And so that's essentially a revenue bond concept where, the debt is, limited in style, just the service. So if the village were to issue debt to fund a project like wall, you could decide to just pledge the expected service payment revenue and not dip into your credit or full faith credit or general fund. And so the costs of that are a little higher because it's special revenue fund. There's not contributing to general fund. But, and so get less of fund. But it's essentially a secured risk allocated array for utilizing either service fees or general fund revenues. Fund infrastructure.
So. No, right. Sorry.
We're
So,
all finding out those information right now.
so with this, and we're broke here. Right, if I'm a developer coming to Nashville and I own the property, I'm gonna develop 190 houses, then 300 houses, right? And I'm expecting that I'm gonna have to help in some way, shape, or form fund the infrastructure. So I want to sign up. I would be willing to sign up for a tip for NCA if that would mitigate the amount that I have to fund upfront for the infrastructure. Would allow me to not have to raise the price of my house and these on the 290 houses. And for the village, that's saying, okay, we are essentially going to give you a break on some of the upfront fees for this infrastructure that we have to fund. But we are going to capture a greater share of those tax dollars, tax units. That would, in theory, assuming market doesn't go crazy, or assuming that treasury don't go crazy, over the long run, that would result in a higher net present value.
Yeah.
Now, all right, so with this, who governs and ensures that these payments are made the way that they're supposed to? And you may not, some of this I think you may not have the answer to, but from what I've been told through conversations, auditor's office, school, is that structures like this have been put in place in the past. For example, in schools, I believe they're supposed to get revenue that they weren't getting. And I believe the auditor's office, they work groups like that. Who governs these things to make sure that the payments that are, these anticipated cash flows are actually making their way to the right cost?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And first of all, it's the development can require that the property owners do the steps necessary to guarantee making sure that they apply, making sure they apply on time to activate the district. Kind of the answer to the TIF question is it's through property taxes, and so the county also goes through our fundamentally in charge of electing. Um, the experience of the inconsistent understanding and allocation, the way that this has been played out has been fundamentally a misunderstanding by by the county manager, by the treasurer, the administrator. But it's not as if this is requiring anything above and beyond what is normally expected of the and I've worked directly myself in improving the county real property taxation tracking and administering. And so from where the county is, the county has a long way to go. But in essence, there's been a net community benefit to this rural project. In Pittsburgh County, which has required the county to get beefed up, to get staffed up to understand what is statutorily required of them, and to accept advice to make sure that each taxing district is getting exactly what they should get. That's fundamental power, the current system, education, other services. Herbs, so it's not asking the council to juggle their talent portion of their passion for singing, not asking them to juggle. It's asking them to juggle how to keep the fall. So, long answer to say that the county is in control of distribution of real property taxes. And MFPA are real property tax adjacent items that they are capable of.
This may be a dumb question. There's no authority or latitude for the county in saying, hey, we know this one you guys signed up for, but actually they're encouraging you to prepare.
No.
So I would assume not, but there's fair guess.
On that note, if there's something.
Yeah, absolutely. I work with villages, townships, and county, track and identify onboard, off-board programs throughout Ohio. Because it's not difficult, but it's not difficult to run. It's difficult to set up, especially if you're not used to doing these programs. But it's not wrong. It's really just accounting for those semi payments for the tax. Everybody. I would never recommend.
Trust that.
I would never recommend.
No, I just an
Just like, in jest, yes. Okay, but if it's something that need to put in place, make sure that we are gonna check the hours, make sure it's not getting the back.
Yes, yeah, and for those, for instance, for those three types that we set up, we are tracking for when to file this application. And for the CA, making sure that that's.
We appreciate that. I'm glad to hear that that's getting more stringent. Like I mentioned, I'm rather for having this kind of work here right now. Some of my concerns, for lack of a better term, because I'm prior hearing said, but I'm feeling that we have some of the most valuable land in the state of Ohio here, right? And I am not against incentive development, incentive writ large, but I think it can be very ambitious in what we're providing incentive for. For example, my philosophy is small for job creation. That creates a vibrant process more so than Village Hall. Village Hall, Village Hall is to be a byproduct of a vibrant process. So there's kind of that where I'm trying to reconcile in my mind why would we give away incentive something that's not. The other is just if we're giving the value, which what are we saying that we're going to get versus what we're actually getting. So it's a long lineup, I suppose, to the question of, I know that these are fairly common, but a few of us attended the new elected official training for last weekend. And presenter there, a number of the stuff, it's very hard to understand. Make sure that it's really, I'm looking at the presentation right now. So I suppose if we could, in a nutshell, like we've already done this, to kind of re-summarize, why would we do this for something, especially housing that represents the obligation for us in perpetuity? Right? Why don't we cut an incentive for a developer when we're going to have obligations for water, sewer, roads, trash?
I mean, that's a really good question. And I would say, I would not necessarily call a non-school tip with an NCA with a reimbursement. It's in essence either to support 300,000, either you have to place internal sewer connection that is not public infrastructure for one, and that's a developer cost, but you have to run the line to them. That's a village cost. So where's the village going to get that money from? Absent these programs, I would be tax fees or other service fees or from the general revenue fund, which is a cost to the village that is essentially born from the tax base of the current members of the village. So you have that money from people paying water fees and people living in the village. By placing a tip over that, you are gaining a revenue stream that is not on the back of current revenue. The tip is dependent on the value of this project coming from this. So it's a new value. So that value is now a way for the village to address public infrastructure needs in a way that doesn't burden for the current village. And the TIP exemption is no reduction in net tax. It is simply a redirection of the quantity of tax back to the village to support public infrastructure. And the NCA from a financial perspective is not an incentive per se, because they are paying 110 taxes per they only need to pay 100. But the only way that they can get the benefit is if welcoming with the consensus. This, the only way that they would get this benefit of having, um, the ability to pay for their public infrastructure improvement, and then get reimbursement from the value that they're putting up, is to consent to use. So it really is buying into the village and then investing in the village long term. It's the only access to the benefit. So, um, abatements are one, that is a direct money back into the pocket of the developer. And that's not what, that's not the proposal, that's not my advice. Um, And, uh, so, so absent tax, breaks, abatement, if an NPA is a way to provide direct benefits to the developer, specifically for those infrastructure costs, without leaving the what village use taxes.
TIF and NTA, are those concurrent? They're TIF and NTA at the same time?
Yep.
NTA doesn't wait to vote things like.
On the taxpayer, a person who's buying a house, am I going to feel like the difference in the house taxes and then it's something developer is that would keep it here.
For the NCA, a new person into the village would pay 100% tax. And the length of that is determined, the NCA developer can decide. What length of time, there's not a 30-year. But if these expected costs or if it's a, if they have to build a traffic light, if they have to build out a turn, and the costs for me are expected to be 45. You can place that charge or 50, decide to place the charge in any number of time where the TIF is essentially locked in for the most part, either for 10 years and you're taking a lot of actions, or 30 years you're taking. So it's just a way to have extra fidelity with the dial that you're able to by the one. Right, so any property that goes into the MCA expands the geographic base of the MCA and can be utilized so long as those facilities are directly from those people who reside or the NCA area. So as the NCA geographically expands with more property incentive placed in the spread of the allowable cost and even greater. So I guess, for instance, an NCA would allow the village to create apartments from additional revenue that could benefit those residents of the NCA, but also benefit anybody. And so the strategies that are able to be implemented by the village that supports life in the village expand as property.
Shifting gears and into this last thing,
they. How that changes things, so I'm understanding correctly, like, somebody bought a home, and wanted to develop a like they.
It's not different. The difference is the amount of taxes that traditionally are paid for commercial properties. um, Are typically valued higher, um, and they don't receive the tax rollback. So there's no tax, there's no vacant tax savings for commercial business. Commercial entities typically need more dedicated and custom infrastructure, so that those costs are higher. Um, and the real difference is the expected horsepower that each particular individual business will bring, because a business is allowed to be commercially fit. There's no reduction of service units available to the village. So every commercial building that goes in or units are available to the village to use with development. So on the residential side, I think that's what the village. On the commercial side, it's more likely. And the process is essentially the same. If you think of a developer of home as that business, the developer of industry is seeking pro forma analysis of get a business.
My last question for now, people folks that are a lot smarter than me have put this structure in place for probably good reason. What are the potential downsides for the village other than what we talked about, how the market flows, how rates change? What downsides of this for it's been for the structure before?
I really think that on the tip side, there's almost no downside, because you're only dedicating, you're drawing areas where you expect value to come up. You expect to have money to spend into one person there. And if it doesn't happen, then you're not, the village isn't out anything, and you don't have a debt. The NCA, you know, it's the political tension. We don't want our current villagers to have to put on their back. But that may cause potential resentment of those future people, where they may be paying taxes to their neighbors, how to cut for maybe hundreds. We don't see a lot of, we don't see a lot of friction in these programs. Once they start, there's an uncertainty before the value turns on, before the occupancy there, because there's nothing coming. But as these programs mature, it gives the village new opportunities to think about. Those revenues are essentially new. They're not in the current fiscal toolbox of the village. So as those tools are utilized, as that value increases, you're able to utilize those tools to fulfill the issue. So that's why a lot of these houses utilize great.
I appreciate you, guys are going to questions.
Yeah.
That help. Okay. Yeah, yeah. A lot of questions. But maybe before we can start on, okay, just taking extra. We may have already been planning this an extra time. So I'm looking at the term sheet for the development supply agreement for the data center on the Press Bank property. I think we already have this cleared up. Gives today. We want to confirm that in Exhibit A, their timeline, and it says that council will consider waiving second, third readings and approving tonight, essentially. In section 4 of Exhibit A, subsection A, clause 1, it says those will suspend readings and approve by no later than March 2nd. Candidly, I do not feel that's appropriate. It's in an earlier draft, but we received this a couple days ago or 2 days ago. Why would that need to happen tonight? What's the critical path? Why that would or not happen?
Yeah, so to the difference between the timeline and that section, that was a distributor's error, and that has been corrected. The village, the only, so, with development and supply term sheet, with the term summary, right, it's an agreement to there are a couple of binding provisions in section. The balance of the term sheet is completely but we don't cause any contradiction. So the final version provides that the village retains all legislative prerogatives. I can't speak for the reason for their vast timeline, other than they probably would like to start as soon as possible.
That's fine. My main point was, to me, we would not be doing ourselves or the community justice by getting this, 2 days ago and then voting on it tonight, something that's consequential and impact we felt for decades, right? So that was essentially my question was, is this an exploding offer? Because, put it bluntly, that feels like a metaphorical, do this now for us, right? And so I just wanted to confirm that now.
No, absolutely not.
So there's a provision in there that said we are not obligated to annex or rezone any property compared to the township. So there is nothing in this that would And again, I know it's a term sheet, it's not the actual agreement, but there's nothing hidden in there that would require us or compel us to annex and rezone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, on the 35, I apologize. The financial benefits piece where, the section, it's 35 million after certain milestones that they would put in escrow, 64 million to the schools after receipt of occupancy. What mechanisms do exist or might exist in the full supply agreement to essentially prevent the timeline from slipping? They have an anticipated timeline in there of when things are happening. What mechanisms could exist or would exist to prevent that timeline from slipping to get to a point where it's, you have to annex and rezone? It makes sense that this all sounds great if they're gonna deposit 35 million next month, right? But if that slips to a year from now, and they have a timeline in there of when they would want us to annex the land, to me, that starts to blend into, okay, we're delaying this project to go get what we want, even though that's not legally what's in the contract. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So this term sheet contains the recommended items that are placeholders for future drilling down actions. The bracket date, yeah, the bracket date for possible consideration outside of the board. It's intended to indicate that that is not a requirement for so to your question about development, which is listed, that this is only concerned this parcel that's currently doesn't consider part of the 200, yeah. It doesn't concern or tie anything that's happening with the village parcel of the issues. So to the extent that any future phase in West Lane 5, it is giving the village, the company's wishes. They're non-binding. And so we will need iron specific on nothing happening outside. Sort of the issue that any
The way I read it, the information is out there now, 35 million, it's 65 million. That's for the 200 acres. That's what they're agreeing to. That's what we're talking about. The other stuff is more of just a notification on what they're considering. If at any point in time, you decide to go outside that plan. But right now, that's nothing, we're not bound to.
Right. My question was more of what prevents the company from saying, oh, this timeline keeps slipping up until that date where we wanted you to annex and rezone, and now those are the same thing.
So there's remedies for all inside that first boundary for the 200 acres. Remedies that they have to meet the certain boundaries, right? Like, would be free on 200 acres. They can't say, well, we want you to consider this one on the day. I don't expect that.
No, and I don't think they would do it explicitly, but you could,
You can-
Projects
you can
run-
load, it can fall.
projects are
Yeah.
always, a unicorn is an on-time.
Exactly, the one I'm just saying, I'm sure Ash puts remedies in there, what the village should do, if anything, who knows what park for another 6 months. Right, so everything explodes, there would be remedies for the village, right?
in terms of
I think that's a separate issue, right? If they cancel the project.
Or anything, but like you said, pushing the guy on that, there's remedies in there for us to make sure that they stay on schedule.
Have other words in the thing.
in the development supply agreement. I imagine once you get to the final approval of the agreement, it'll be nailed down, but anytime I read anything that says the company will provide up to $35 million, that could be $34 million of false funds, up to 35 million. You know what I'm saying? It's not specific enough for me to hang a hat on, because I can always say, yeah, I want to give you $400 for, for watch. But, you know what I'm saying? It's up to, I see that several times, they'll provide up to. A negotiated agreement that's signed, sealed and delivered, how does that get nailed into something concrete?
So the up to amount is, based on the actual bid and actual cost to make the necessary improvements. So if the, uh, if those costs are 34, then the village will get
So,
34.
29, that's what the associated costs.
Yeah.
So it will be tied to something tangible in that regard, and not just on a plan by somebody who's going to know what's the $5 million.
Right, yeah. Through the bid process that the village would go through to secure contractors for construction, that's what identify the actual cost.
Piggybacking on that question, I know that, these specifically existing contracts, right? But what is the typical remedy that says in there, they won't unreasonably withhold all the funds? If it's a bid acceptable to the company, right? What is the typical, remedy if we can't come to an agreement on what's acceptable or then release a fund? Is that typically arbitration, or do we have to do it straight to? And I know you can't, it's not in a contract yet, but typically what would you have that?
No arbitration. They court. They have to go there and store them. Why they think that they don't have to pay. And so, multi-state company always want to try to take the project outside of the community. With arbitration, they can actually are corporate headquarters in Hawaii, so they're more but that's not. I would just recommend.
Yeah, tangential, that typically, if we had to take them to court, or said, hey, you have to pay up, they could pay our.
Second question, some of the language, regarding village will confirm future changes can offer the project. What does that look like exactly? Because we have zoning stuff that's coming down the pipe that could potentially.
Yeah, it's getting out of my specific realm. That it's a question, but my understanding is that the village can change the zoning. But it doesn't affect the zoning that particular any construction. If it's not related to housing. So there could be, there could be reasons why, for instance, having a retrofit or building to allow for the same. That would be something where compliance with the future change strictly necessary. Village changes to the zoning code as applied to the application, but to be considered that's what the village approved with respect to what is able to be performed holding you valid application, except
Yeah. Thank you. Motion. So done. Oh, yeah, we have a couple things pending at zoning and this last week. Is there a plan to do those things in the next meeting? We had a couple items that we picked over to zoning. Okay.